But with that countdown from Hollis, we have to first say a very happy new year to members of the media, our South media colleagues. This is our first media conference for 2019, so let me wish all of you and your families a very, very happy new year, a very productive new year. I hope that your media work is safe during 2019 and productive, and that you continue to provide Trinidad and Tobago with all the information that comes out of South and Central Trinidad in particular. Having said that, this media conference is going to be led by the chair of the MSJ, my colleague Gregory Fernandez, who issued a statement on behalf of the party a few days ago, which was the party's response to the Prime Minister's two-part address to the nation, which took place on Sunday and Monday evenings last. I myself happened to be out of the country. I actually was on a family holiday and only came back in last night, so Gregory, as the chair of the party, and our General Secretary Ozzy Warwick, who are in charge of all of the party's activities, and analyzed the Prime Minister's statement and made a very comprehensive response. And so we wanted to deal with that and some other issues coming out of that at the media conference this afternoon. So I'm going to ask Gregory to take the lead, and then I may add one or two comments afterwards, because I've not seen the PM's address, so I cannot comment on it directly. Gregory, of course, would have seen it and analyzed it very carefully and so on. But I will give perhaps some other responses and maybe answer some of your questions if necessary. Gregory?
MSJ, in responding to the Prime Minister's address to the nation, would like to, in particular, deal with the fact that there was a lot of information that was not given by the Prime Minister that throws a whole different light on what he said. All right, so in the first instance, I'm going to deal with the employment position which he articulated. So employment was shown to the end of 2017 and not 2018, in which some additional 15 to 20,000 jobs were lost. And therefore, since the PNM has been in power, over 40,000 jobs have been lost. Additionally, given that approximately 20,000 persons enter the labor force each year, many of whom cannot find jobs, the fact that the official unemployment rate is being managed by the government. The man in the street is feeling the pressure. And in the build-up to the Prime Minister's address, the newspapers had asked the man in the street what he thought the Prime Minister should speak about. And the two major items was unemployment and crime, because people are feeling the heat. So the 5,000 jobs that he says will be created over the next 2 to 3 years is just a drop in the bucket versus what the unemployment rate will likely be over the next couple of years. Where are the jobs going to come from if the government continues on its path of austerity and firings at WASA and other public sector enterprises to come? An MSJ government will not fire workers, but implement policies to expand the economy by truly diversifying the economy, investing in major infrastructure work in all depressed communities, and taking on board plans from business and labor about how we should resuscitate Trinidad and Tobago's economy. The Prime Minister skirted over the issue of our foreign exchange reserves. He showed a graph showing the foreign exchange reserves declining, but he made no comment on it. And the MSJ wants to comment on it. The foreign exchange reserves declined by $3.5 billion between 2014 and 2018, and will continue to decrease to under 6 months cover within the next 2 years, based on the trends of the graph shown by the Prime Minister. The multinationals continue only to pay a limited amount of taxes, given the generosity of the UNC and the PNM government. The Prime Minister highlighted the fact that oil companies were paying over 50% tax in Nigeria of the total oil income, but never said, even with the PNM's adjustment of the 12%, what they will be paying as a percentage of revenue over the next few years in Trinidad and Tobago. Once we are not earning sufficient foreign exchange, we face the prospect of devaluation in the next couple of years. The Prime Minister said not one word about this. The Prime Minister needs to outline what are the expected revenues from the oil companies and LNG over the next few years, and show how we are going to avoid a depletion of our foreign reserves so that we will not be facing massive devaluation. That is what the country really needs to know, because this is going to severely impact on the standard of living of all in Trinidad and Tobago. This is the approach an MSJ government would have taken, and would move to recover the taxes avoided by the large multinationals who have engaged in transfer pricing to avoid paying the true taxes they should have paid to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. One energy expert, Tony Paul, has said it could be in the order of 17 billion US dollars, which is over 100 billion TT dollars. And in 2017, in an Ernst & Young report on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, they stated that Trinidad and Tobago should have had multiple times what it has in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund if we had employed a policy of managing our national patrimony that was similar to Norway, who now have over 1 trillion US dollars in their fund. So this is a major failure of the PNM and the UNC government, who trying to portray to the people of this country that they have done an excellent job in managing our situation. So we want to be very clear. We want to be very clear. The country's debt to GDP ratio is actually increasing and not decreasing. And whereas the output and earnings of the oil companies may be increasing, the output of the rest of the economy is decreasing. And this is going to be more so with the shutdown of Petrotrin. Petrotrin contributed as much as 12% of our national GDP. So when you take that out of the equation, there's going to be a significant decline in our GDP. So we are seeing a lot of austerity measures from the government, and the man in the street is not benefiting from that increase in output. So the growth that they are talking about is growth for the oil companies and not for the man in the street. So we're going to have growth with jobs, jobless growth, and wage freeze. That is what Trinidad and Tobago faces coming down the road. The Prime Minister spoke to percentage increases in comparative countries, but percentages can be deceiving. Increasing the price of gas from 1 cent to 3 cents is a 200% increase, right? So when he spoke about increases in percentages in a number of countries, he never mentioned what these were in dollar terms. And therefore, if the Prime Minister is to really tell us what really happened, we need to understand what the dollar increases were, right? Because some of those are major oil producing countries where more or less gasoline was very, very cheap, even cheaper than us, right? The Prime Minister attempted to trivialize the incompetence of his government in handling of the ferry scandal. That is a disservice to this country. This scandal has led to the collapse of the Tobago economy. And the Prime Minister never managed to say, but was contemptuous of the people of Trinidad and Tobago for berating his government for the failure to manage this scandal. I'm sure we can all remember his words. Ferry, 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 that's all they have behind me. But it is the ferry, ferry, ferry that is responsible for the decline of Tobago's economy. He juxtaposed the UNC's wild spending and corruption against the ferry scandal to say that the ferry scandal was nothing, while saying that it was mainly responsible, without saying, that it was mainly responsible for the collapse of Tobago's economy. How ingenious. The diversification projects of the government are insufficient to generate jobs and foreign exchange the country requires, and were mixed in with projects that had nothing to do with diversification. The Prime Minister never said that the PNM and the UNC were culpable in the fact that during the period of oil and honey, there were minimal attempts at diversification. And even after the deterioration in our fortune since the financial crisis in 2008, as evidenced in the IDB report on the country, which says that we have been experiencing a continuing fall in the standard of living since 2008 to now, that they only now trying to get some diversification projects on the road. It's a case of too little, too late. The Prime Minister set up an economic advisory board and took no advice from it. So much so that a number of its key members, including David next to me here, resigned and indicated that the government was wasting their time. We all remember when Dr. Farrell resigned from the board. So the PNM government must blame no one for the state of economy but themselves. Prior to the 2015 election, Dr. Rowley said that the PNM governs alone. So they must also take ownership of the direction of the economy. The Prime Minister showed utter disrespect for public servants and other workers who had been living on very low salaries for a long time before the contract was struggled and negotiated for between them and the government. So it was not an election favor to public servants. The Prime Minister must remember that his PNM government had offered the labor market a wage freeze of 0, 0, 0 just before the 2010 elections. Right? You all can go back and check that. They offered 0, 0, 0 to not just the public servants, but workers from the state enterprises. And the ensuing protests led the late PM to call in the elections. On 3 occasions, when he was asked why he called the elections after he lost, he had said was because of the labor pressures. Because they wanted to impose a particular type of settlement on workers. We all remember what happened at that elections. The PNM government was trounced. Whereas an economic crisis was approaching and the LNG companies were ripping off Trinidad and Tobago through their transfer pricing mechanisms, the PNM preferred for the labor force of TNT to pay for the crisis rather than to go after the multinationals who were outsmarting the government. The government was asleep. Right? So they can't come now and try to say that, you know, they have been managing the economy so well and all of that. That's a picture they are painting that is a false narrative, and the MSJ gives the PNM's and the PM's presentation a fade. So this is what I have to say at this time. The political leader would like to elaborate a bit on the hardships from the austerity that the government is about imposing.
The Prime Minister's address, or two-part address to the country, Sunday and Monday evening. I just wanted to say one or two things, and then I'll open it up to questions from members of the media. Firstly, I heard a news clip earlier today where the Prime Minister was saying that one of the stellar achievements of his government was making sure that Trinidad and Tobago did not get to the IMF. But that's a false narrative, and let me say why. You don't get to the IMF and have to engage in IMF conditionality programs unless you need to borrow money from the IMF. You borrow money from the IMF only when your foreign exchange reserves has gotten down almost to zero, and therefore you don't have enough foreign exchange to be able to pay for essential imports, medicine and food and supplies and so on. And so there was no way that Trinidad and Tobago was close to the doors of the IMF in 2015, nor are we that close today. So to say that his government saved us from the IMF is a false statement, because we were never about to go or needed to go to the IMF in the first place. Secondly, as Gregory pointed out, the decline in our foreign exchange reserves has been very significant over the last several years. And this is in spite of three major injections of foreign exchange. Two by way of drawdowns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, because when in 2018 and 2017 the government drew down from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund several $100 million at each time. I think it was about $300-400 million on each occasion. They would have then got that money in TT dollars, but that money would then have gone into the foreign exchange market. And secondly, when the government in 2016 went on a road show to raise $1 billion in bonds in the international market. The Minister of Finance went to the United States and so on. And so we got $1 billion injected into the economy, which would have boosted our foreign exchange position and so on, because the central bank would then have given the government TT dollars in exchange for the US dollars that came in. And so those one-off injections, large injections of foreign exchange helped to keep the decline in our foreign exchange reserves to the level at which it was. Without that, our foreign exchange reserves would be much lower than it is today. That's the first point I want to make. But given the current trend, as Gregory made the point, if we continue to lose foreign exchange at the rate at which we are doing, then we will end up at the doorstep of the IMF. And if we do end up at the doorstep of the IMF, that responsibility will be on the shoulders of Rowley and his government, because they did not do the things that were necessary to diversify the economy and also to create a climate of business and investor and citizen confidence in the economy. Because in spite of where the official foreign exchange reserves are, 1/4 of all the bank deposits in Trinidad and Tobago is in US dollars. There's over 23 billion TT dollars equivalent in US dollars in local banks, which means that what has been happening is that because of the lack of confidence in the economy and the lack of confidence in the Rowley government, and before then the Kamla Prasad government, the people who had the ability to do so were either converting TT dollars into US dollars, or having earned US dollars one way or the other, were putting that those US dollars into US dollar bank accounts in Trinidad and Tobago. This is quite apart from US dollars that are being banked outside of Trinidad and Tobago by nationals and by firms and so on. And therefore, our situation of declining foreign exchange reserves must be seen against the background of a total lack of confidence in the government and lack of confidence in the economy, resulting in currency speculation as people try to buy US dollars, thinking that the price of the US dollar will go up relative to the TT dollar in a few months' time and so on. So there's speculation, there's hoarding, there's capital flight, all of this is taking place and so on. And that is because of the mismanagement of the economy, the lack of confidence, because there's no vision by the Rowley government of where this country should go. There's no vision and no program for diversification, and all they're trying to do is to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze in order to try to have enough money so that later for the 2019-2020 budget, later this year, they'll be able to run a little something to people in order to win votes. That is the only strategy. They're squeezing now with austerity in order to try to have some change to run in the next budget, as they did a little bit in last budget, in order to try to win votes. That's their only strategy, that's their only vision. And we say that that is a failed approach to the management of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and to the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. And I should say at the same time that Mrs. Prasad Bissessar and her bunch also failed this country totally between 2010 and 2015 because they spent way above what they should have been spending. They raided NGC, Petrotrain, and all state enterprises and so on in order to run money to win votes. That was their intention. Quite apart from the corruption and the over expenditure on projects and all of that. So they have no moral authority to speak out on that. And it is only an MSJ government that can approach matters to say that those who ought to be contributing to the economy, that are not contributing their fair share, not asking for anything more than their fair share. The multinationals who engage in transfer pricing and who have robbed the country of money are not paying their fair share. The people who are not paying taxes in accordance to what they should be paying are not putting their fair share. On the other hand, working people and poor people are putting more than their fair share. They are carrying the burden of adjustment by higher prices, wages that are not going up, and so on, and therefore they are losing a real quality of life. They are not able to live a decent quality of life. So we have this situation where one of the largest conglomerates in this country reported an increase of about 50% in their profits this last financial year. Another bank reported $1 billion after-tax profit and so on. So there are some who are doing very, very well, and the majority are doing very, very badly. And an MSJ government will flip that so that the majority are able to do decently well, and so that everybody can contribute fairly to ensuring justice for everyone, rather than austerity and pressure for the majority, while a few are living a very comfortable and fat life. Those are just the initial points I wanted to make, but then we are open to questions and comments. Disagreements, of course, if you wish.
This presidency, countries distancing themselves, refusing to attend the inauguration. Our own foreign affairs minister has attended, and there have been complaints about that. A short while ago, the opposition leader would have said we're at risk right now of diplomatic isolation because we're not clear on where our stance is. And she's saying, let me just quote something in here that stood out to me. That we need to preserve the relationship with all regional and international trading partners, many of which, of course, have distanced themselves from the re-election of President Maduro. What is your position on that? What is your opinion and position as a political?
Well, the MSJ's position, I'll give you. MSJ was represented at the inauguration of President Maduro in Caracas by one of our executive members, at the invitation of the party, President Maduro's party, sent an invitation to the MSJ to invite a representative to attend at the party level. So we had a representative of MSJ present in Caracas. We stand for the principle of respect for the sovereignty of each country. Therefore, each country has the right to determine how they should develop. We also stand for the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of another country, so that one country should not seek to interfere in the internal affairs of another country. Now, the United States is making a lot of noise these days, or some people in the United States, about Russian interference in the US elections in 2016 that was supposed to help Donald Trump in the elections. And the Americans, people are saying there should not be Russian interference in American elections. Well, the Americans have been interfering in people's internal affairs, elections, coup d'etats, destabilization, military intervention in this hemisphere and elsewhere for more than 100 years. So the Americans have absolutely no moral authority to lecture anybody about respect for sovereignty and non-interference, because the Americans interfere, okay? And we are sure they're interfering in Venezuela as well. So that with the sanctions against Venezuela, with other economic actions against Venezuela, they're trying to bring about regime change. And they are putting pressure on Caribbean governments and other governments in the region to break ties with Venezuela. But that is wrong. Each country has the right to have diplomatic and economic relations with another sovereign state. The Americans have no difficulty in having big trade relations with Saudi Arabia. Trump said it, that he doesn't care what happened to the journalist who was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul in Turkey, because the Saudis buy hundreds of billions of dollars of military hardware from the United States. And there's no democratic election in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yes? Women only got the right to drive last year. Okay? So that the United States should be more concerned about the lack of democracy in Saudi Arabia, whereas Venezuela has elections all the time. I myself had a press conference, I showed you photographs of the process, electoral process in Venezuela and so on. Venezuela has a very open electoral process, and President Maduro was freely and fairly elected in Venezuela, and he therefore is the president of Venezuela, and therefore we agree with Trinidad and Tobago recognizing the freely elected president and government of Venezuela. All right, and it is very unfortunate that there is a division within CARICOM on this question, but that is because of U.S. pressure. Yes, but the U.S. must take the beam out of its own eye with respect to how it deals with other regimes. Remember, not too long ago, the U.S. was supporting apartheid in South Africa, openly supporting apartheid in violation of U.S. sanctions, UN sanctions. Similarly with Margaret Thatcher in the UK, and so on, supporting apartheid in South Africa, where 80% of the population did not have the right to vote, far less the right to go to school, far less the right to go from one village to another village, you have to have a pass book, and so on. And just 20 years ago, the US was supporting that. So they can't come and lecture us about any process. Yeah, the Israelis barricading Palestine and creating a blockade of Palestine and denying Palestinian rights. So we are very clear in our position, and we hope that Venezuela is allowed to its economy to develop. We are not now commenting on the rightness or wrongness of the internal economic policies of the Venezuelan government. All right, that's not for us the issue. Okay, we are now recognizing the government as a freely democratically elected government of a sovereign state. And that is our principal position. Okay.
Mrs. Pasabi said, what complicates the situation is indications, I'm quoting him, of a growing military and economic presence of Russia in Venezuela, as well as Iran's intention of them signaling their intention recently to send 2 or 3 warships. And given that Trinidad is kind of in charge or spearheads security of the CARICOM and that responsibility, she's saying even the security of CARICOM nations who disagree with opposition to even attend or attend, given the whole human crisis situation taking place in Venezuela, as well as the removal of other countries.
Yeah, Mrs. Prasad, the Cesar and the UNC have a very bad foreign policy position. Very clear about that. And it is not now, it has been for quite some time, and therefore they are opportunistically seeking to engage the opposition in Venezuela. They did not want the Dragon gas field, not because of any political principle, but because if the Dragon gas field doesn't come on stream, it will make it worse for the Rowley government, and therefore it will be better for them electorally. That we are not on that kind of opportunistic politics at all, right? We are on principle matters. What is therefore in Trinidad and Tobago's interest is what we are concerned about. So Mrs. Prasad says right now is singing from the playbook of the US government, okay? And perhaps to curry favor with them, which would put them in a better position to win the elections in 2020. That's my analysis of that. Because she wouldn't say, for example, that Donald Trump has threatened on more than one occasion military invasion of Venezuela. She didn't condemn that. She didn't condemn the OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro, who has done all he could within the OAS to try to have Venezuela expelled from the OAS and therefore to create a pretext for external military intervention. She hasn't spoken about the military bases in Colombia. You know that the US has about 7 or 8 military bases in Colombia. Okay? We'll talk about that. So the US has a military presence in Colombia just offshore, just on the border with Venezuela. The US fleet, the 6th fleet I think it is, operates in this region and they have warships all out there all the time. Yes? What is going to be their access to Curacao and Aruba with respect to getting military intervention? Bolsonaro from Brazil, newly elected president, said he welcomes US bases in Brazil to deal with Venezuela. Did she make a comment about that? No. She only commented about Russia and Iran? Now you have to discuss the whole thing. What our position is, principle, is that this must be a zone of peace. The Caribbean must be a zone of peace. That is the position of CARICOM. It is also the position of CELAC, which is the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, of which Trinidad and Tobago is a member. All of CARICOM is are members. Venezuela is a member. We should be a zone of peace. So we want no warmongering, whether it comes from the United States, whether there's a pushback from Russia, Iran. We want it to be a zone of peace. And so all threats of military intervention must come off the table and allow Venezuela to pursue its process as a sovereign nation.
So you don't think we're at risk of diplomatic isolation from other countries?
No, I don't think we're at risk of diplomatic isolation. What we are calling for is for CARICOM to get its act together and to have a unified position on Venezuela and on all other international matters.
Mr. We'll come back to the speech by the Prime Minister a few days ago, right? Now you said here that the country will face the prospect of devaluation in the next couple of years if our foreign relations go down, right? I think the last time that happened when we were forced to go to China was in the 80s.
1988.
Right. So do you see similarities between now and back then in that we have to go back to the IMF, as well as I think one of the measures they introduced last time was starting much VAT, as well as the cut COLA. Do you see something similar happening here?
Yeah, well, the COLA was removed and then the 10% wage cut on public servant salaries happened prior to the formal IMF agreement, yes? Mm-hmm. But there was a devaluation in August of 1988 from 360 to 420, I think it was, or 4 something. And that was as a precondition to an IMF agreement which was signed in either October or November 1988. Then you're correct, introduce VAT. So we changed the tax system from a progressive tax system whereby people who earn more pay more as a percentage. So if you are earning $10,000 a month, you pay, that's why I say you pay 20% on the dollar. If you're earning $100,000 a month, you pay 50% on the dollar. That's a progressive tax system. So we changed that to a regressive tax system where everybody pays the same percentage of tax. Whether you're high income, well, some people don't pay any at all, but if you're a medium income person above, $6,000 a month, you pay 25%. If you are earning $100,000 a month, you still pay the same 25%, right? And then to counterbalance the loss in income tax from people that way, the government introduced indirect taxes, which was VAT, which was a sales tax. And therefore, whether you're rich or poor, you buy a certain item, you pay the same amount of VAT, yes? So the burden of adjustment got shifted onto the backs of ordinary people. They bore more of the burden of adjustment, which is austerity, which is what we are opposed to. So yes, we are seeing a similar trend, and that is why the government was being warned that what happened in 1988 didn't happen, it wasn't sudden. There was a progression because we lost our oil and gas revenue, primarily oil revenue at the time, in 1981. So what we did is draw down on our reserves between 1981 and 1986, during our Chambers government period. And by the end of 86 into 87, we had no more reserves. And so Robinson and his government felt there was no other option but to go to the IMF at that time. And this is the point we're making, that what the Rowley government is doing is drawing down on all our reserves. Well, they're not directly drawing down, but our foreign exchange reserves are falling because we are consuming by importing more than we are earning from our exports. Yes? And at the same time, we are borrowing more, so our debt is going up. So when your debt is going up, your government debt is going up on the one hand, and therefore your ability to pay back your debt becomes problematic. At the same time that your foreign exchange reserves are going down, you're going into a bad place, and that bad place could be the IMF. So the trend line is towards the IMF, right? And that is where the Rowley got, because they're not doing anything to expand the economy. Because if you expand the economy and you diversify the economy, then you either spend less on imported food because you're producing more food, and you are also earning new foreign exchange to be able to offset the losses from oil and gas. So you stabilize your balance of payments, and therefore your foreign exchange reserves will continue to drop. And at the same time, as you grow your economy, the economy expands, and therefore the amount of taxes to be paid will go up, both in terms of VAT, because there's more people buying stuff, and therefore more people buying stuff means more VAT, and more people working for more money, therefore you get more income taxes. But you also have to collect the taxes that's supposed to be paid by everybody, including the multinationals. And so that is what the MSJ says we would do as a government. Yeah? So I'm sorry I'm giving you a little long answer, but to try to explain some technical economic issues in as layman way as possible. I hope you caught it, what you said. What we'll do is run an economics course, political economy of Trinidad and Tobago 101 for journalists and so on. Without charge, I'm not asking you to adopt our economic policies as yours, but just to explain so that you could understand how these things work. Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.